how has serving others changed you?
Sometimes life is hard.
Yeah.
And you struggle to find purpose. Even if you believe God's put something on your heart that has given you absolute purpose, challenges in life can sometimes steal that for a
minimize
season.
it. Yeah.
And so it becomes really challenging to find your place. I had a massive awakening through serving and serving others. And in some ways, serving others has almost been a lifeline for me.
Sure. In November 2024, I had the honor of attending the Earthshot Awards hosted in Cape Town. In rooms, spaces, and even boats filled with people making a difference, I knew I had to play my part the best way I know how, through storytelling. So journey with me as I sit down with some of the most innovative people in Africa who are repairing our planet by protecting and restoring nature, cleaning our air, reviving our oceans, building a waste-free world, and fixing our climate, and might I add, empowering women all over Africa. My takeaway? No action is too small. We can all do something. So I ask you, how will you play a part in saving this place we call home and impacting another person? Hello, Wisdom and Wellness family. Welcome to another episode in partnership with Earthshot, where we are highlighting people and foundations who are doing incredible things. She's no stranger to the podcast. I would love to call her a friend. She's the CEO and co-founder of the Kolisi Foundation and very passionate about serving individuals and communities, and especially passionate about women. And she makes room for important conversations rooted in health, wellness, self-care, responsibility, and ownership. Rachel Kolisi.
Hello.
It's so good to see you.
Please call me a friend. I'd be incredibly honored. Oh my gosh.
The last time we had a conversation, we were in Cape Town and it was more personal. So today it's about your work, okay? I think you're doing some incredible work and I just want to learn more about it. When we were in Cape Town with Earthshot, how this actually happened, I wasn't sure where I fit in bringing like solutions and I just started talking to a few people and it clicked to me that, oh my gosh, I think I'm very interested in food security. And I spoke to Verity and she's like, oh, you should meet Rachel. I'm like, I know Rachel. I know Rachel. But just to kick off, I want to know what about your own life has created a deep desire for you to make an impact in people's lives? I mean, you've dedicated your whole life into serving underserved communities.
Yeah. I think it really just, it started off as a youth, kind of just walking around. I think in South Africa, none of us are really removed or are just not able to see the poverty across South Africa and just the struggles that tons of individuals, tons of communities have across South Africa.
Yeah.
And I remember it just always made me feel really uncomfortable growing up. Why do I have all of this privilege? Why do I have all of these things? But I can literally walk across the road and see, 5 individuals that don't have.
Yeah.
And so it's just something that like in my spirit and my soul just never sat right. And so I mean, of course, as a youth, this is not at all what I imagined, that we would have this amazing, really successful foundation. But I knew that I wanted to do something.
Yeah.
And I think that this is where maybe some people are getting it wrong, that they believe that the responsibility sits with the government or the responsibility sits with a certain organization or nonprofits. But the responsibility of the state of a country or a city is completely up to the individuals that live in it.
Yeah.
And so I've taken on that responsibility, and it is my absolute privilege to be able to do this work. I think, yes, it's hard, it's strenuous, and it's really frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
It's also really eye-opening and gives you a good insight into what it really means to grow up and live in South Africa.
Sure. And I think you've led me to my next question. And I was sharing with the other ladies that as soon as you hear the words climate change, solution, food security, the words sound so big. To a certain extent, I think it excludes a lot of people where personally I feel like, oh, I'm not the one to make a difference. You know, there's someone else who should be doing this. But like you said, from a young age, I think you grew up in Cape Town, right?
I grew up in Grahamstown.
Grahamstown. Okay. But from a young age, you can already identify that there's a difference here between the way I'm living and someone just down the road. So how did it all begin for you? Because I know it didn't just start with this foundation and this website, and that's intimidating for a lot of us. So what's the smallest moment that you remember that this was the beginning of you making a change?
Well, I think with great success comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
And Siya and I, had a conversation the night before the World Cup final in 2019. And we wanted to see things change in South Africa. And with this massive success that we believed would happen the next day, we sat down, we made a couple of points of things that we wanted to see change. And the next day, it almost felt like I felt this shift almost of like, there's that responsibility. Now go out and do what you said you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so all of the conversations that we had, coming off of that victory and that amazing opportunity, were really just about sewing and giving back into South Africa. And I think that was really the first part of envisioning this organization and the foundation. But beyond that and before that, both him and I, in our own individual capacities, found ways and things that we could do to try and help, whether it was a library or books donations or stationery drive, just small little things here and there. Obviously now, the small things, yes, they're still important, but the impact that we can have through this organization is far deeper and really sustainable.
Sure. And, we are privileged and we raise children. I think, let me speak for myself, that growing up I didn't have everything, and now I can give my children a little more, and it's so easy for them to be removed from what's actually happening and how other children are growing up. I mean, during the holidays, we were packing out small clothes, and I had to explain, in fact, even toys that they were still using. And my kids didn't want to give away those toys. They wanted to give away the battered ones, And I was like, no.
I know the struggle.
Yeah. So I had to explain to them that, no, we're giving them to someone who doesn't have, or someone who doesn't have parents. And the question was, why don't they have parents? And, the question just rolls like, why don't they have money? Why don't they go to work? You work, those just innocent questions. How do you ensure that your children are sensitive and know what's happening and also just have a generous spirit?
I love how you've touched on the conversation that you have with your children, that it is a conversation and it's not just let's beat around the bush or avoid this conversation altogether, because it is uncomfortable to have when you are the one with and you have. It is an uncomfortable conversation to have, especially with little people whose little minds just don't understand. Why is it not equal? Why is it not fair? I think that is the most important thing for me with my children, is just when they notice something, and it's often most of the time in a car drive on the way to school or coming back from school, and they'll be like, why is that person's situation and ours is ours? And so just to create a dialogue, to create a space where we can have a conversation, I think is the most important thing, because I think we underestimate the amount of conversations that happen at school. Yeah. And potentially how few children are exposed to the reality of South Africa. And so if your children are informed, if my children are informed and empowered to be able to have those conversations, I think it spreads really far in a school system. And I think that's super important.
I mean, just speaking of our children not being exposed, it's funny, but not funny, but it speaks of the innocence of a child. Nuri was, I think she was about 2. I think I've shared the story, and we were driving and there was a disabled man on the side of the road, and I think his leg was bent, and she looked and she pointed out, she said, "Mommy, look, he's dancing." And in that moment, you don't know, do I do I explain or do I just, leave it there? But like what you said is, I think at the right time, it's so important to have conversations so children can understand that people are different. We come from different homes. We don't all have the same thing, so that we don't just raise kids who are blind to what's happening because of privilege.
Yeah, 100%.
So you guys have 3 focus areas: food security, education and sports, and gender-based violence. Can you just talk me through each focus area? And it's a 2-part question, but my first question is, what has been the biggest issue you've picked up in all of them? Because I don't want to just leave it at a blank statement of we've got gender-based violence. What actually is it, and what does it look like daily? What are people facing?
Yeah. Let's start with gender-based violence. I think anyone who is South African can completely agree that gender-based violence is a epidemic of its own in our country, and women are under attack. And I mean, it's not always just physically, it's mentally, emotionally, financially, and many different ways, but women are under attack in this country.
Sure.
And in my personal opinion, I feel like we need a hang of a lot more women leading in significant roles in countries in order to see change across not just a country, but across the world, actually. I think women are nurturers by nature, and I think we carry empathy right with us everywhere we go, and that makes us really spectacular leaders. And unfortunately, when women are under siege, they cannot be in a position to lead.
No.
And that is what's happening in South Africa. Women are just under attack. And I mean, I can go in detail about, very specific stories that women are experiencing, but one of our projects that we are working on, and with Sarki Bartman, which is a phenomenal project, is an empowerment center.
Yeah.
It's one of the leading causes of women going back to a perpetrator is financial stability.
Correct.
And so we have started a sewing program where women are sewing bags for empowerment packs that we then sell to corporates and others.
Yeah.
And the women then receive a monthly income, being able to sustain themselves. I was just recently there because we have a beading project with them as well, and we did an amazing thing with the Cape Town Marathon recently with Adidas. And I was chatting to some of the women that are part of the beading program, and some of the women are current clients, but some of the women have actually left the shelter and gone home, but managed to put a down payment on a flat and have been able to send their kids to a new school, have been able to feed their families.
Sure.
So it's really amazing success stories that have come out of this. But just standing and listening to them, the women were explaining, they don't think people fully understand. You're in a situation where you're getting physically abused or other, but abused. And you're desperate to leave. You've got children in the mix. You've got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
You've got a very lack of information and resources. And so you drop everything. They quit their jobs. Their children have to go to different schools, drop out of school, and they go to a shelter that's completely foreign to them. And it's amazing that they have a space to go. But I think I haven't ever fully appreciated what that actually means to drop everything.
Yeah.
And so that was really eye-opening. But that's one of the programs we have. And there's a bunch of others that we're doing through gender-based violence. But I think the current statistic is 1 in every 4 women are survivors of gender-based violence. I mean, almost on a daily basis in South Africa, you're reading about a woman who's either been killed or a child who's either been killed, and the statistics are just unacceptable. So
it's such a nuanced conversation, because I sometimes wonder because that's someone's son who's doing that, and I sometimes wonder if, and it's not to be just on the mother, but as a woman, am I playing my role in ensuring that I'm raising a son who's not going to be abusive, whether emotionally, financially? Like, I wonder what the parents of our partners did wrong. Like, what has gone so wrong that it's our country? It's not, our country is literally leading in these cases. And I just wonder what went wrong. But conversation for another day. Education and sport.
Education and sport. So we've got our lead program in education and sport is our Siya program, which is based out of the community where Siya grew up, Sweden.
Yeah.
And we've got just short of 4,000 children that are a part of that program.
Sure.
It's
girls and boys.
Girls and boys, and it's got a feeding program attached to it. So all of our work, gender-based violence, sports and education, and food security are all layered. There's not one without the other. You don't find gender-based violence without a sport attachment to it, or an education or a food security attachment to it. Neither do you find sports and education. So we've got a food program that's a part of the Siya program. And we've hired 18 previously unemployed youth from the community where they've grown up and trained them up, and they are now coaching the children. So a lot of schools in different communities across South Africa can't actually afford to have physical education as a part of their curriculum, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at like nutritional rates, you look at obesity rates among children, high blood pressure among children and even adults. I mean, it's completely through the roof. So the fact that children are not being exposed to sports, and that's even without the fact, taking into account what you learn in a team environment, in a sporting environment, the mentorship that happens between a coach and children. So it's been a phenomenally successful program, and then going into food security, which is...
Sorry, before you go there, how much change have you seen in kids who, and perhaps you have a success story you can think of a child how they behaved before they started sports and how they behaved after they got invested in sport?
I actually just get goosebumps thinking about it, because we recently filmed with a young boy who started off really angry, really just, he had been through absolute trauma in his life, and come into the sporting environment as like a rebel, doesn't want to listen to coaches. He shows up late, if at all, got mixed up in some other stuff outside of, school and sport. And I'm just thinking about the video that we filmed with him, but we filmed recently with him, and he just like burst into tears because his life, not his circumstances, but his life has completely transformed as a young boy growing up in South Africa. And that's thanks to the mentorship that's being created through this program, and the responsibility that was placed on him for the younger children that watch him and see him. And he took on that role of the fact that there are younger people watching him, and he wants to do better. And so just feedback from the teachers and the coaches on this is a specific individual, but I mean, this is one of many that we've heard success stories from. And it's
mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing.
I think, honestly, a lot of children, like you said, his life has changed, not necessarily his circumstances. People just want to be seen and acknowledged. And I think sometimes it's that you see kids being angry, misbehaving, and it's just as simple as just get in a team, contribute something, be responsible for something. That's literally what kids need.
And to be in a space where they're able to process their emotions safely. And actually just be able to feel how they want to feel. So sport is also an outlet for a lot of people. It's an outlet for me, exercising. And so I think even without consciously knowing it, I think a lot of children are able to process what they're potentially seeing at home or experiencing in their day-to-day lives, and they're able to kind of process that in a safe environment through sport.
We underestimate how the smallest of things could change generations. I mean, I can imagine just through him and his change in behavior, he's probably impacting his family and the people around him, and it's just as little as join a sports team. Food security.
Food security, I mean, this is really where we started with this foundation. It was at the beginning of COVID. There were big conversations around, we don't know what COVID impact is going to be on communities across South Africa with our HIV/AIDS rates, with TB rates. And so food security, we just started with food parcels and supporting community kitchens across South Africa. And the need just feels like it's greater and greater and greater every day. And there are a few people that are coming up with really amazing solutions, but none that are fixing it across the board yet. And I think a lot of that is really because, all communities are different, people function differently, work differently, thrive differently. And so we are currently supporting 38 community kitchens across our geographical focus areas. And we pulled back from doing individual household hampers outside of gender-based violence. So we still continue with household hampers through the gender-based violence shelters that we support. It just allows for the shelters to check in for 3 months. So each woman who leaves is then sometimes go back to a perpetrator. It allows then for those social services to be able to check in when they deliver the food parcels to see how women are going and they're safe. And then the community kitchens, and we call them community kitchens and not soup kitchens because they're more than food. It really has become almost a hub in many communities where the leaders of the community kitchens, the women most of the time that are managing these kitchens, are able to check in on a lot of the elderly and youth within the community. And this goes to healthcare, it goes to gender-based violence. We've actually upskilled towards the end of last year, we did an upskilling of all of the leaders in the community kitchens so that they can now identify gender-based violence within women that are coming to the kitchens and children. And so, food security is a massive conversation. I mean, South Africa actually has enough food to feed everybody, but there's a big logistical problem. And so if there was someone that was able to come up with an amazing solution for all the logistics, it would get us in a far better place. But until then, people are still going to bed hungry at night.
Do you ever feel, and I mean, you're mentioning all these things, and I'm realizing how layered everything is. Do you ever feel helpless, or is the progress that you're making enough to keep you going?
Yes.
Okay.
I feel helpless.
Okay. I thought it the other way around.
I've done so many interviews where people are like, you must just go to bed every night and pat yourself on the back. And, well done.
Well, as you're talking, I'm just like, once you thought you've solved this problem, you realized, oh no, there's this and there's that and there's that. And I think as someone who has a lot of empathy, I can imagine how you take that responsibility organic, like it's in your nature. Yeah,
absolutely. And so it is sometimes a heavy thing to carry, but I'm inspired by individuals. Look at you, Mpumi, as an individual. Like, you've chosen to take something and do something with it that's having an impact far beyond what you could possibly even think or imagine. And I believe in individuals. I believe in the possibility that my work, Siya's work, Siya's decision, every single one of our team members, every single community kitchen leader, every single woman a part of the empowerment program, those are all individuals that function in a community, that function in a space. And so if all of us are just doing something that's heading in the right direction, maybe we'll never be able to, measure the impact of what that is. But I'll know there was an impact there because I made a decision, because Siya made a decision, and all these people along the journey have been given options to make different decisions. And so that inspires me and that keeps me going. Is it easy? Hell no. It is really hard work, but it's necessary.
It's important. Someone's called to do it. On a brighter note, is there one, and I know you shared about the young boy with the sport, but is there one specific story? And maybe let's highlight a woman who you met in dire conditions and they've turned their life around. Just a story of impact that sits with you every day.
So There's two women that I think of. One is Lungi.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I met Lungi. Lungi manages 5 community kitchens in Cape Town.
Sure.
And the first time I met Lungi was kind of at the height of COVID, and she reached out through someone that actually now works for our foundation. But she reached out through her, just desperate. She was the impact of COVID and the way that it highlighted food security across South Africa was so necessary and important.
Yeah.
Because she went from feeding a couple of hundred children a day to thousands of children a day,
Sure.
and not just one meal, but sometimes 2,
Yeah.
in some cases 3. And so the need for more support was massive, and so they reached out. They saw we were doing food parcels, and she reached out. And I remember we met at a church and we did this massive delivery, and I remember everything Lungi was wearing.
Sure.
But I remember, I don't want to get but just the exhaustion, when you look at a woman and you just see she's had
She's carrying the world.
Yeah. And just had the life dragged out of her, but somehow she's stayed committed to her calling. She's stayed committed to keep fighting. And I think this is it just speaks to a woman's spirit and how we function as women. But Lungi remained consistent in a community in 5 communities that desperately needed her. And I just think I almost have this vision of her and that day that we met her. And then every time I see her now, I'm just oh, look at you. Come on. Girl is dressed to the T.
Yeah.
She is leading and managing, as she was before, but with such confidence, such direction, such empowerment.
Yeah.
And she really helps us lead this conversation in food security and in our work, and making sure that we are going in the right direction, and that we're constantly following the needs of communities. But that, for one, has been phenomenal. And Lungi left a corporate job.
Yeah.
And she's raising children, she's a single mom, she left a life that could have provided a lot more for her as a God calling to serve her communities. And that's what she's chosen, and she stayed fully committed to that no matter what. And it's just been such a privilege to be able to journey with her in what she's been doing.
You launched the Nikita Lewis Serenity Hub. I think that's one you touched on earlier. Why the importance of mental health facilities? And I ask this because I think when the obvious need is physical, it's so important to overlook the mental need, but you've paid attention to it. So why the importance of mental health?
Oh, I'm so glad that mental health has become a conversation, and such an important one, I think, just across the board. You touched on earlier children benefiting from the coaches and mentorship, and why they don't get that at home, and specifically from moms. But we are responsible as adults for ourselves. And so I think there's millions of children growing up in really traumatic situations.
Yeah.
And if there's no intervention at that stage, that trauma lives out. We see it in ourselves. Every single one of us sees our childhood trauma being lived out in our adulthood.
In our daily living, yeah.
And so now more than ever, I'm understanding this conversation so much better. But not having an intervention at a youth stage really does just set children up for, not for failure, but for a really complicated, really hard life.
Yeah.
And so mental health across the board and in every area of our work is really something going forward, I would like to just lean into that much more.
Yeah.
And what's great about the Kolisi Foundation is we have our own programs, which I touched on a few of them, but we also support many organizations and their programs. And so many of the organizations that we support, I think actually, if not all, have a mental health aspect to it. But the Nikita Lewis Hub has been so incredible because it's created a space outside of the Saartjie Baartman Center that really is just so calm and safe for women to be able to debrief and go and have their therapy sessions. The one-on-one therapy sessions are held in that library. But Nikita was a client of Saartjie Baartman who was murdered. She was housed in the safe house, and she went down the road to go get a cool drink or something, and her abuser found her there and stabbed her, and she died. And so it's one of the most devastating stories to come out of Saartjie Baartman, and they really just wanted to honor her family and her mom through that library. And so that's how it's called, the Nikita Lewis space. But it really has created such a safe environment for so many women that are currently there.
Yeah. And I mean, I had to choose what we're going to touch on, but this is my last point. I love the food gardens and the school nutrition. Why specifically food gardens? And I think if you pay attention, I'm trying to highlight that you guys do such a holistic approach, because it's easy to just buy a box of tomatoes, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And go hand it over. But the food garden is a longer process and step. Why go that direction and focus on that?
Yeah, there's, if there was a blanket answer to fixing food security, we would just do it. You know, people would just fund that and just do it. But unfortunately, there isn't. And there's so much research. There's so many amazing articles that have come out of it. But we did tons of research in food gardens and found, so our food gardens are very specifically in schools because we've got nutrition programs in all the schools that we work in. And we did a lot of research with the community kitchens to see if we could do food gardens there, because that was the dream, right?
Yeah.
We're envisioning this community kitchen that is literally being fed from the garden on the outside, and, then
poof, everything's solved.
No problem. Have a chicken pen or something. But there's a water conversation.
Soil.
Which hasn't even started. There's a soil conversation. There's a space conversation. If you're standing in a township, and the majority of the community kitchens that we support are served out of people's homes, and there's just no space. And so it's still very much a conversation for us and us navigating it. But I love that there's so many options available now. There are so many amazing people with amazing minds and amazing visions for South Africa. That are coming up with really phenomenal solutions. So we're investigating and looking, and also every community has a different way of investing in something and being open to something. And so really just understanding, of course, the importance of the community's needs and what would work and what would not. And so it's exciting conversation that we're having about what is food security and where can we be having the biggest impact. But for now, the food gardens at the schools, absolutely, it's been a phenomenal solution. But we would like a bigger conversation.
What I love about the food gardens being at a school is it goes back to what you're saying. You said about giving children a sense of, and it's one of your core beliefs, responsibility and ownership. So I think once kids take some sort of ownership, there's responsibility, there's confidence, you feel needed, you feel the need to show up. Because when there's no responsibility and ownership, that's when it's easy to just get involved in all sorts of things. So I think a food garden for children, I think it's amazing. I mean, I made my children plant cherry tomatoes, and it was responsible. Did you water your tomatoes? Did you do that? And you see them come alive and have no time for anything else because I have a garden to take care of. So there's so much, as I was just reading through the work that you're doing, there's so much that seems like such a simple daily thing, but the impact, you might not see it now, but I think it's going to yield such great results in the future.
I hope so.
I
And
believe so.
I think there's like a therapeutic aspect to like gardening as well. That's like not even it. But this is the beauty of the work, is we like, okay, so we're doing gender-based violence. There's this conversation of food. There's this conversation of mental health. Like, and then it's just constantly, how can we plug it in? Like, how can we plug it in? And that's why like the 3 focus areas, that's how we
feed off
landed.
each other. It's a beautiful ecosystem.
Yeah.
My last question, how has serving others changed you?
Sometimes life is hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't understand why certain things land on our plate, and why challenges are our portion. And you struggle to find purpose. Even if you believe God's put something on your heart that has given you absolute purpose, challenges in life can sometimes steal that for a
minimize
season.
it. Yeah.
And so it becomes really challenging to find your place. And all throughout my life, I struggled severely with depression as a teenager, to the point that I tried to commit suicide. And I had a massive awakening through serving, and serving others. And in some ways, serving others has almost been a lifeline for me.
Sure.
And I truly believe that it's one of the biggest privileges in our humanity is to serve others. I think every single one of us has something that's been implanted, I believe, from God.
Yeah.
And it requires us to have empathy and to love and to see people for where they are, and for what they might be going through. And it really is just, it's a God-given gift to be able to serve. And I hope that my children see that. I hope that my children realize one day, when they're older and know some of the challenges that I had to experience, and they're able to remember me being able to serve through the challenges, and be able to still show up for others.
Sure.
And it's not minimizing at all my experience or what I'm dealing with and the struggle that is for me, but it really is just understanding that it's part of the healing and part of the process that I'm going through.
There's a scripture, and I don't remember it, but it basically speaks of, as you refresh others, may you be refreshed. And what you said about it's a lifeline, I think sometimes God works in that way, because if we don't focus what you're doing, when we only focus on what we're going through, we magnify it. And like you're saying, we're not downplaying it, but as you serve others, you see that, oh man, I'm not the only one. There's hope. If someone can make it through this, I can make it through that. And someone looks at you and thinks, if Rachel can make it through this, I can make it through that. So you're one of my favorite stories. You're one of my favorite women. And I think I said it from the first time we had our first conversation. I look at you and I'm so inspired by your heart. Why are we getting all emotional?
No, I don't know.
I'm so inspired by your heart and your obedience. I think what you do is just really obedience. It's not easy, it's not flashy, but it really speaks of the posture of your heart. And as I said, as you refresh others, as you heal others, may you be healed.
Thanks, Mpumi. And like just while you're speaking and saying that, and I think there's emotion coming just because it's two women that have just been through a lot in a very short amount of life. And have chosen to serve. I mean, what you're doing through Wisdom and Wellness is so necessary. And I can't tell you the amount of women that I've just said, if you're looking for resource, if you're looking for, go there. And I just think that you likewise are just making it so holistic, so empowering, and so necessary for women. So So likewise, I'm in awe of you, and I'm in awe of the decision that you have made through your organization and through yourself as an individual and as a mom and as a wife.
Yeah.
And more power to you, girl.
Yeah. Let's keep serving. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wisdom and Wellness family. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And again, I ask you, what are you doing? Rachel said something so important, that serving others has almost become a lifeline. And I think we can all relate to that in some way in our lives. How can we extend a hand even when we feel broken? Because we can all make some sort of difference.